Hello, my name is Ian Beabout, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So today I'm sporting the Frank Zappa inspired imperial mustache, and that must be a result of spending a weekend with this massive and also massively cool Apostrophe 50th anniversary box set. This is the latest in a series of multi-disc box sets, which started 2 years ago with the release of Waka Wazoo and was followed in about a year's time with Overnight Sensation, and in less than a year followed up by Apostrophe, Frank's 18th album, which came out in March of 1974. So we're missing the 50th anniversary by a few months. But for those of you who are saying, wow, this is coming out so soon after Overnight Sensation box. Well, the original albums were released only 6 months apart. By the time that Apostrophe came out, Overnight Sensation was already selling a lot of copies for Frank and picking up a lot of steam. This came out and sold about 200,000 copies within the first month, which was a huge deal for Frank. So for a lot of people, this was their introduction to his world, myself included. So I brought a little show and tell. This was actually the first version of this record that I ever heard. This was released in 1986 on Rykodisc, and it combines the Apostrophe and Overnight Sensation albums together, which, in my opinion, somewhat leads into this false narrative that Apostrophe and Overnight Sensation were recorded at the same time. However, I've done some research into this while I've been listening and learning more about these seminal recordings. The best I can come up with is that there were two Bollock sound sessions in 1973. The first occurring in the spring, in May, June, that time frame, and the second in December. And there are a couple of different sources on this, and they don't all line up. But the best I can come up with is that Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, the first 2 or 3 minutes of the Apostrophe album, and Cosmic Debris come from the Overnight Sensation sessions. The rest of side one, that being Nanook Rubs It, St. Alfonso's Pancake Breakfast, and Father Oblivion, all stem from the December recording sessions at Bollock Studios, these being connected to the Roxy performances. And this connection further is cemented by the fact that they were released as part of the Roxy performances. If you listen to this, and I think these recordings are dated December 12th, 1973, it's pretty apparent that most of side one of Apostrophe comes from these December Bollock sound recordings. Now, the second side is a little bit different story. The second side was recorded between 1970 and 1972, mostly Paramount Studios, which is where the track Apostrophe comes from, as well as the drum track from Eccentrical Fours. Stinkfoot is actually a leftover from the Record Plant 1970 sessions, as released on Funky Nothingness, which I have but didn't bring to show. I guess I can put up a little picture of the album there, and was fascinatingly edited out of a cover of I'm a Rolling Stone, which is a fantastic cover. Uncle Remus stems from the Grand Wazoo and Waka Jawaka era, and you can hear an early version of that track on the Waka Wazoo box set. The music was penned by George Duke, and the lyrics by Frank Zappa, and the arrangements by Frank Zappa. Let's talk about Apostrophe. This is a great album. I think that it's in many ways a perfect album. It's a lean and tight 32-minute excursion into the absurd storytelling of Mr. Frank Zappa. I think that it's the perfect introduction for newbies. I first heard this album when I was like 8 years old, and I hadn't heard anything like it. It totally just drew me in. Frank's wit, his sense of humor, his guitar playing, his voice, all of that just seemed to affect me in a way that other music I'd heard at that time didn't. It just kind of felt like, this is for me, especially, seeing as I suffered childhood asthma. And when Frank makes reference to asthma in Cosmic Debris, that was something that really grabbed me, because I don't think I'd ever heard any other artist talk about something that had affected me like that. So I was hooked. So you open up with Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, which is a bluesy, kind of gentle introduction into this world. It's easy to like. This being exemplified by the fact that it was edited into a single by a Pittsburgh DJ, and this song took off. It was very popular and played a lot, so much so that Frank made his own single, which is included in the box set. It's funny. We're coming from this idea that Inuit culture has multiple words for snow, and potentially even a warning against children eating the yellow snow left by the Huskies. And I just think that's such an amusing idea. Next, we continue this journey with Nanook Rubs It, which I think starts to become more Frank-like. It starts to become more complex. You hear the doo-wop influences, the blues. You hear, Frank's incendiary guitar leads starting to come in, as well as his wordplay. Frank is able to string together a sentence that is just so absurd and descriptive, but hilarious, and it sticks in your memory for a long time. Next up, we have St. Alfonso's Pancake Breakfast, which is, in my opinion, the full emergence of zany Frank Zappa. At this point, if you haven't turned the record off, in my opinion, you're here for the long run. This is where things start to get a little bit more, let's say, interesting, a little bit more complex, a little bit more typical of maybe what we would expect from Frank Zappa. And this is followed up by Father Oblivion, which is, again, just more absurdity, more zaniness, some great guitar playing and rhythm playing in general on this track. I was really impressed. I mean, I've always been impressed by this track, but this band is really nailing it. And again, this is the Roxy and Elsewhere band, so these guys could play this hard music in their sleep. We end side one with Cosmic Debris, which is this song about gurus selling spiritual enlightenment. And Frank obviously has plenty of disdain for these kind of characters, and in my opinion, rightfully so. And musically, this is a really bluesy number, but there's lots of interesting sound effects and unusual instrumentation that kind of add to the storytelling and make this such a cool song. It almost feels like we're coming back again to the Don't Eat the Yellow Snow setting, something that's really accessible and easy to enjoy, but it does have that kind of trademark Zappa humor. We start off side two with Eccentrical Force. This is a drum track that was recorded sometime in 1972, and everything else was overdubbed later. So this is like a studio creation, much in the way that Stinkfoot is, which is the track that rounds out the album. And this is one of my favorite songs on the album. It's just so deliciously odd, and it has more of Frank's clever wordplay, more sound effects just kind of rolling around. This is one of the trippiest tracks. It's got some great guitar playing. The first lead, it sounds like Frank's parodying Jimi Hendrix, and then about halfway through that, it veers into Frank Zappa territory. And I love that about it. This is hands down one of my favorite songs on the album, Eccentrical Force. And then next we have Apostrophe, the title track, which is a jam featuring Jack Bruce of Cream fame on bass, Tony Duran playing rhythm guitar, and Jim Gordon on drums. This is a track that I guess is a little bit controversial because Frank himself had some not so nice things to say about Jack Bruce. He said that Jack Bruce wasn't really interested in being a bass player, as in playing root functions. And as such, there's a bit of a ego battle going on between Jack Bruce and Frank. They're both kind of trying to fight for the same space within the arrangement. And I actually think that this battle is, maybe neither one of those guys win, but we do. The listeners win, because it's almost like listening to Godzilla and King Kong battle it out. And I bet you can guess which one's Godzilla and which one's King Kong, if you know your Frank. But I actually really like this. It's two titans going at it, and it's brief. It's only like 4 or 5 minutes in the album edit. So I actually really enjoy this track. Next we have Uncle Remus, which is a gospel-inspired track written by George Duke. I seem to remember reading that George Duke was the one to introduce Frank Zappa to gospel music. It was something Frank really wasn't into yet, but Frank liked the song enough that he wrote his own lyrics. And thematically, this song ties back to, in my opinion, songs like Trouble Every Day, the social commentary songs. I think this is a lovely track. It's one of those Zappa songs that if you removed the lyrics, it would just be a beautiful song on its own, and it would be compelling. I think that this is punctuated by the presence of Tina Turner and the Ikeettes singing backup. I think that their contributions across this record and Overnight Sensation are a huge part of the album's appeal for me, and I love their performances. Finally, we end up with Stinkfoot. The drum track for this originates in the Record Plant 1970 sessions. And this is a song that is completely unrelated. It was a cover of a blues song called I'm a Rolling Stone that Frank cannibalized and mixed all the parts up together and created something new out of it. And this is a song that I have mixed feelings about. I don't always enjoy it live, but I always really enjoy the studio version. I think it's got great feel. It's kind of like a relaxing way to end the album. It's a more mellow way to end the album. But it is a chance for Frank to introduce and tie up a lot of these conceptual concepts, namely the conceptual continuity, which runs through his entire catalog. In fact, there's a quote. This is from a press kit from 1971, and these are Frank Zappa's words. There is and always has been a conscious control of thematic and structural elements flowing through each album, live performance, and interview. So in Stinkfoot, you have this imaginary discussion, or perhaps not imaginary, perhaps it was dreamed, or perhaps it even really happened in this bizarre world. But you have this discussion between a man and a poodle, and the philosophical elements of conceptual continuity are put on display and discussed, as is the name of the record. So Apostrophe is a punctuation that denotes ownership. So you could use apostrophe to denote Frank's ownership of the music. So it's Frank's music, it's Frank's album, it's Frank's production, Frank's arrangement, Frank's guitar playing, Frank's lyrics, Frank's band. So, it is a solo record. It's not a Mothers of Invention record. So I feel like apostrophe, for one thing, denotes ownership of the material, but it also is meant to compress words down, to eliminate something. This could be seen as a commentary on Frank's editing techniques, especially the second side of this record, taking archival recordings and cutting them down, rearranging them, and making them into something new. So this is such a perfect way to encapsulate all of the ideas of this record, and in many ways, the Frank Zappa catalog in general, his collected works. So I really dig this. I really dig this philosophical discussion that comes out of a poodle dog at the end of this record. And it's funny, but it also thematically ties the picture together. So I really like it. Let's talk about the 50th anniversary edition and what's included. So on disc 1, we have the original 1974 album remastered by Bernie Grundman. And at the end, we have a number of bonus tracks. Tracks 10 through 16 were previously released on The Crux of the Biscuit. This was a Project Object audio documentary single CD that related to the Apostrophe album and its material. A couple of these, the Don't Eat the Yellow Snow basic tracks, alternate take, and also the Cosmic Debris basic tracks, that comes from the Overnight Sensation sessions. And I confirmed this by the dates that are included in the Crux of the Biscuit booklet. You do have something really special at the end of this disc, and that is the unedited master and new mix of the Apostrophe title track. And in my opinion, this is the best the jam has ever sounded. It sounds absolutely fantastic. And it's brilliant to hear the whole take. I mean, I don't really hear any issues with Jack Bruce's playing at all. I think that something about that power struggle was bringing out the best of both of them in a way. And I found this really fun to listen to, and I thought it sounded great too. We also have a piano and vocal mix version of Uncle Remus. This was released as an early single, and I find it very fascinating. I find it nice to hear basically just Frank, George Duke, and the Ikettes playing together. The Bernie Grundman master, which is included on disc 1, does sound very good indeed. I compared this to the 2012 version, and there's not really a whole lot of difference. Maybe the new version is a slight bit louder. Maybe it has just slight more clarity, but I think this was also a really nice version of it. I think this sounded good to begin with. So I'm happy to have this new master, but it's really not the biggest draw for me. So let's open this up and talk about it.
And before we get too far along, I thought I would take a moment and remind you to please like the video and subscribe to the channel. The next venture at some point this month will be a discussion featuring my friends Mike and Jocko, and potentially Gavin from the band Bent Knee, in which we will discuss this box set at length. Back to the program.
I should do a roll of the unboxing so you can see what this box set looks like inside. I am actually a really big fan of the format of these box sets, making it the same size as other CDs on your shelf, so it doesn't take up any extra room or anything like that. And it's just a clamshell. It just opens up, and it has the discs inside and the wonderful booklet. I would like to see at some point some of the older box sets get a reissue in this format. Some of the stuff that, say like the Hot Rat sessions, which had that board game and the guitar picks and stuff I really wasn't that interested in, that just seemed to increase the price. I would like to see something like that reissued in this clamshell style, that just fits right on the shelf and doesn't have any extras other than the discs and the booklet. No scarves, no marbles, or wait, that's Pink Floyd I'm thinking of, but you get the idea. I like this really basic presentation. I also wanted to shout out the booklet that is included with this, because when these sets first started coming out, I did criticize, even probably publicly a little bit, that the booklets weren't that informative. And I remember being particularly frustrated when the Hot Rats set came out, because it seemed like there was a book on Hot Rats that came out at the same time, and I thought, well, why couldn't they have just included that book as part of the package, so we could really dive in and learn more? At least this box set has informative liner notes, especially from Joe Travers. The Simon Prentice liner notes are a little frustrating. I think sometimes they sacrifice creativity and trying to spin a phrase over clarity. And that made research for this project a little more challenging than I'd liked it to be, because I had to read things very carefully to figure out what exactly is he trying to say. But aside from that minor criticism, I do think that this box and this booklet are both overall excellent, and they do a good job of painting a picture of this era. I pulled the discs out so you can see them. And I did show these, of course, on the unboxing video, but on, we've already talked about disc 1, that being the studio album and album session bonus tracks. With disc 2 and disc 3 shown here, disc 2, disc 3, you have a unreleased show from the 21st of March, 1974, Colorado Springs. This would be the month that Apostrophe was released. So you are seeing a snapshot of the band at the time, right after Apostrophe was released, but before it necessarily became successful. This was before the Yellow Snow single, etc. But what's cool about this disc is it features a rare lineup of the Mothers. This is essentially the Roxy lineup. We have Bruce Fowler here, Frank in the middle, Ralph Humphrey. Second row, we have George Duke, Tom Fowler, who's playing bass, Ruth Underwood on percussion, Chester Thompson on drums. Up top, we have Napoleon Murphy Brock and Jeff Simmons, who didn't quit the group yet, but he would. He was going to quit the group. Well, he already did quit the group once, but it was a different group. But he'll quit this group too, because that's what Jeff does. He quits. I wanted to highlight the fact that this is the 9-piece Mothers, and this is a band that has never been presented on an officially released product, and I don't think they're well bootlegged either. So this is a rare snapshot into the history of Frank and the Mothers. And this concert is excellent. It's road tapes quality. If you guys can remember the road tapes, which were, it could be kind of scuzzy and not the best sounding. They weren't necessarily multi-track. They were usually 4-track or even just stereo. This concert is presented in mono, but it's very clear and crisp sounding mono. And you definitely can hear all the instruments, especially the drums. The drums have a lot of power to them. So I find this concert perfectly listenable. I also find the performance to be exemplary. This is really some special stuff. And it seems like Frank's in a good mood. The solos are inspired. If you remember my Whiskey A Go-Go 1968 review, I was a little bit tough on the improv, and I got some flack in the comments for that. And I wanted to take a moment and say that this concert, the Colorado Springs 1974, to me, and I know that the comparison's unfair, but to me, this is everything that Mother's Show wasn't. When I was listening to this performance, I was never bored. The solos were constantly engaging to me. The rhythm section was constantly moving and changing and morphing under every solo, so I was never bored. I was always felt inspired by what I was hearing. And Frank himself plays some excellent solos. George Duke is always a MVP for me. Ruth Underwood, I think, is a genius. People make a huge deal out of Frank Zappa being a genius, but what they don't often talk about is that his band was also full of brilliant people, and that really elevated the music. That creativity gave the music a boost. A few other things to mention. I like that we get on disc 3, which I have here. I like how we get right back to back. We get an early version of the song Andy, which would be released on the One Size Fits All album, as well as Florentine Pogan, and they're very different. Andy has a different title. It's called Is There Anything Good Inside of You? Surprisingly, all the ideas are there, and it's a very compelling version. Florentine Pogan, on the other hand, is quite a different version. And it's faster, and they kind of rip through it. It's not a perfect performance, as you know, this disc really isn't a perfect performance, but it's very compelling, and it's interesting for those of us who've been listening to this music for decades and decades to hear a new version of it, to hear it still cooking, so to speak. We round out with the King Kong Chunga's Revenge, Son of Mr. Green Jeans medley, which is one of my favorite medleys. In fact, the whole disc pretty much is full of some of my favorite Frank Zappa melodies. And if you're not interested in Atmos or any of the multi-channel stuff, which we're going to talk about in a minute, if you're only interested in live shows, I don't think you're going to be disappointed by what's included here. If you can get past the fact that these are road tape quality recordings, they aren't super sharp or super clear, and they do have some, like kind of an official bootleg quality to them. If you can get past that, I think that they're really worth owning and hearing. And oftentimes the problem with these live shows for me is that there's diminishing returns, but I feel like this show I might listen to more than some of the others. So this gets full marks for me. On to discs 4 and 5. This is a fall 1974 show from Dayton, Ohio, which from my current location is only about 3 hours. So this was recorded within just a couple hundred miles of me, 50 years ago. But it's cool to have something from the state that I currently live in being represented. We start this disc with a extra track, and that's Inca Roads from Salt Lake City, Utah, the 18th of March, 1974. Now, Joe Travers did say that there were some spots in the Colorado show where the Salt Lake City, Utah show was used to fill some holes, or like where a tape ran out or whatever. I couldn't really tell, although I definitely could tell some changes in fidelity here and there. Inca Roads is a fascinating piece. It's probably my favorite Frank Zappa composition, if I were to be forced to pick one. But it went through a very long gestation period, starting off as like a lounge parody, which you hear on the Halloween 73 show and also the Roxy performances. But over time, it morphed into this out-of-this-world progressive rock parody / ultimate statement upon the genre, sort of in the same way as like Jethro Tull's Thick as a Brick. It's like an absurd parody, but it's also one of the best things of the genre at the same time. This isn't really what I would call an early version. It's kind of still partway through its development, because, you think that fall in September is when they performed it on the Token of His Extreme disc, and that is the one-size-fits-all version, or at least the basic tracks for it. So we're kind of finding it in between the lounge version, but not quite the fully formed version. And it's interesting, but it's not really my favorite thing. I'm bigger on the later developments of this piece. However, the Dayton, Ohio concert from the 20th of November is really interesting. And this is a slightly different lineup. So at this point, Ralph Humphrey was out, and that left Chester Thompson as the only drummer. Jeff quit the group because Jeff quits. That's what he does. And at this point, Bruce Fowler had left. Bruce, of course, was the trombone player. So we're down to a sextet lineup. Apostrophe had been out. I think it had even achieved gold record status. And Frank had released a follow-up, Roxy and Elsewhere, recorded at the Roxy in December of 73, and also partially at Edinburgh, as well as a few other sources. So here you find the Mothers. This would have been after they recorded a lot of the One Size Fits All album, and this is after the Helsinki, Finland concert, which takes up You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore Volume 2. They're really tight here. They know this stuff. They can play. And it's a great show. It's probably more accurate than the Colorado Springs show, although the Colorado Springs show had a little bit of air specialness to it that makes me prefer it. The sound is better here. It's presented in stereo. There is some high frequencies coming off of like the guitar and sometimes the marimba that are a little irritating. Took some getting used to, but overall, I think that the sound quality and performance on these two discs are excellent. And the material here is very close to what you got with the Helsinki, Finland show, which was only, I think, like a month or two before this. And it's not that much different from the Erie 74 show, which was a week before this, released on the Erie box set, which I don't have, but I'll show. Not much to say about this on an individual basis other than I preferred the second disc slightly more. Dynamo Hum is a song that I will always defend. I really enjoy it. I just think it's fun and it's funky. And this version, they took a lot of risks with it in a compelling way. And that's something that kind of is a thread that runs through, I think, many of the fall 74 concerts that I've heard. And that's that there's this combination of looseness and freeform with highly structured arrangements. And the arrangements are very different. There's always something new and surprising. For instance, like the version of Village of the Sun isn't my favorite. I like the slower versions that you hear on Colorado Springs and even the Roxy performances. But otherwise, like Pygmy Twilight is awesome. It's very close to the Helsinki, Finland arrangement. You get room service minus the actual bit, which is nice because I don't necessarily want to hear that every time, but I like the music. I like the first part of room service, so I like that. Some great playing from everybody. Frank, especially, George Duke. Again, I mean, those guys are my MVPs when it comes to this band. And we finish up with an encore of the Don't Eat the Yellow Snow Suite, which is really fun to hear. It's, maybe not my favorite version, but the one thing I thought that I would point out is that I enjoy all of the secret word style references that occur on both of these concerts. And I also really enjoy how Father Oblivion on this concert, which is Dayton, Ohio, rips. And it's very close to the album arrangement. And sometimes you hear that song live and it's not. Especially the earlier versions, again, like Sydney, Australia, don't quite have it. But I liked hearing it pretty close to the record because that's one of my favorite songs on Apostrophe. So at the end of the disc 5, we get the Apostrophe TV ad, which I'll talk about in just a moment. We have the Don't Eat the Yellow Snow single edit, which to my ears, I had only ever heard this on the Strictly Commercial CD, the compilation. And to my ears, this new transfer sounds phenomenal. This is a great sounding transfer of this single. And I like having it here for historical purposes because this was Frank Zappa's first hit. There's 2 Frank Zappa mixes of performances from Europe, the European tour of 74. That tour is otherwise not represented on this set, so I enjoy hearing the Goatborg guitar, which is a solo from More Trouble Every Day. And I also enjoyed the very funky Approximate, which is track 13. Finally, we end up with a track called The Poodle Bites, which is fun. It's essentially Frank's sped up vocals from the end of Stinkfoot, and you can hear the Ikettes singing with him, and it's just fun. It's a really cool way to end the disc. And at the end, you hear him make a comment like, people probably think I'm really crazy for writing a song like this, which made me laugh that he's got that sense of humor running through everything he does. Even in a recording session, Frank is cracking jokes and keeping the air light and fun, even though we're playing really tricky music. We haven't gotten to what is my favorite thing in the set, that being the Blu Ray disc included here. And this is awesome. This is it. This is what I'm here for. On the Blu-ray disc, you have several mixes of the album, all presented in uncompressed formats. So first up, you have the Dolby Atmos version, the spatial audio multi-channel version. Fantastic. We'll talk about it in a minute. Next up, we have the 5.1. Frank's original quadraphonic mix, presented at 96K over 24. Fantastic. We have 2 bitrate versions of the stereo mix, which I believe is Bernie Grundman's new master. I did listen to these, and they're quieter than the CD. The CD's not loud. I don't find it like annoyingly compressed or anything. I think it's good work. But I do like having the uncompressed versions at high bitrate on the CD. And I think that if I'm going to listen to this album in stereo, I'll probably reach for the Blu-ray over the CD versions for that reason. Why there's 2 bitrate versions of the stereo mix, I don't know. I mean, if I had my druthers, I would say just keep the highest bitrate one. I don't need 96K if I have 192K. I don't really get that. But also, before I move on to talking about the multi-channel mixes, it's really nice that they included the Apostrophe TV ad. That's one of my favorite TV ads of all time. It's so much fun, and it's cartoony and zany, and it's perfect for the album. Had I seen that back in 1974, I think I would have gone out and bought this immediately. Even if I'd never heard of Frank Zappa, I think that would have convinced me. And, Frank Zappa's background was in advertising, and I think it shows with something like this. Now, I have mixed feelings about including the audio. I guess it's only 46 seconds or 27 seconds on disc 5, but I kind of think if we have it on the Blu-ray, do we really need it? It doesn't take up that much room. I'm not going to complain. The thing to mention is that the Dolby Atmos mix is once again by Eric Goebel and Karma Auger. They had done the Waka Jawaka and Grand Wazoo albums a couple of years ago, and they also did the Overnight Sensation album. And let me tell you, folks, they did an amazing job with this album. It is totally immersive. So right from the start, I noticed that the wind sounds at the beginning were floating all around the room, probably coming from the height speakers and the rears to get that effect. But to me, it's like super important if you're going to make an Atmos mix to make a statement right from the beginning that this is what it's capable of. I think that the David Bowie Ken Scott mix of Ziggy Stardust was great. Did a great job of that, showing us that we're in Atmos right from the beginning. And I think that this Zappa mix does the same. The one thing I noticed overall is that it maybe lacks a little bit of punch, especially in the drums at first, if you compare it to Frank's quad mix from 1974. But I think this is a reasonable trade because Frank's quad mix seems, to my ears anyway, to be very front heavy. Most of the instruments and stuff are coming in the front on the quad mix, whereas the backing vocals, like the Ikettes or some of the doo-wop harmonies, are often coming from the back. On the Atmos mix, everything's spread out, and it feels like the album is part of the environment. There's really, smart use of pans and moving things around in the room, especially when the sound effects come in. I noticed in Nanook Rubs It that there were some guitar leads that weren't in the original mix, so it was nice to hear a little bit of extra stuff there. I noticed also on St. Alfonso's Pancake Breakfast that the percussion tracks were raised, and they come in from the back when that gong crashes, and it's just it's glorious. I have wanted to hear that percussion track cranked up ever since Dweezil demoed it in the Classic Albums documentary, and it's nice to hear it in a prominent place in the mix. Father Oblivion, you hear the guitar overdubs in the front. I also should mention that it's a unique choice to mix Frank's vocals in the height speakers, and the bass is almost always coming out of the center channel. And that's true of all of the mixes so far. All of the Atmos mixes so far have placed the bass in the center channel. And it definitely gives these Zappa mixes a different signature than other mixes. And I like it. I like that choice. But to put Frank's, because I'm fairly certain Frank recorded a lot of his vocals in stereo, perhaps using 2 mics or something like that. And that's part of the fabric of this album. It's part of the aesthetic, or those widespread vocals. And I think that mixing them in the height speakers was the way to go, because had they compressed them down to the center channel, it would have lost some of that power and dominance over the mix. And that's so important to this record. So thumbs up, big thumbs up for me on that. Cosmic Debris. I was a little bit disappointed in this one because I wanted to hear some of the sound effects, like the top coming off of the can, or I wanted to hear more of that spread across the room, but oftentimes it sounds like it's coming pretty much front right. And I don't know why they didn't spread that out more. But it sounds excellent, so I'm not going to complain too much. Eccentrifugal Fours is one of the coolest things on the album, and that's a track that was immersive even in stereo. In fact, this whole album was immersive even in stereo. It's nice to hear like some of the backwards reverb coming in from the back of the room and traveling to the front, and it's nice to hear some of George Duke's synthesizers swelling and bubbling around the room. Next, we have the Apostrophe title track, which I think is hard to make sound good spatially because there's really only 4 things going on, and it kind of makes more sense in quad. But, one thing I noticed is that this is probably the best this has sounded, and I could hear every part of Jim Gordon's drum parts. Every piece of the set was very clear to me. I could clearly tell which parts were Tony Duran and which parts were Frank Zappa on guitar. And again, having Jack Bruce's bass coming from the center channel is really fantastic. Uncle Remus is another track that doesn't do much spatially. The piano is maybe a little lower in the mix than I'd like it to be, but that's a small complaint. Again, the iCat's coming in from the back. There really isn't much opportunity with a song like this. However, Stinkfoot is fully cinematic. And this has never been like a huge favorite of mine, but at least in the Atmos mix, there's lots of cool stuff floating around the room and sound effects. And at one point, Frank is playing a guitar solo. I did some of my research from a book called The Big Note. And I read a passage about how that solo was done. This is a quote from Frank Zappa. "There's an interesting sound where I'm using an acoustic guitar with a magnetic pickup on it and a Barkus Berry on the bridge. The Barkus Berry is going into one channel and the magnetic pickup is going to a Mutron and the other channel. So you have a sharp attack and an enveloped attack. It gives a lot of space." So I compared this solo on the quad mix versus the Atmos mix. And in quad, Frank had those channels panned hard left and hard right in the front. I don't hear any of that coming in from the back. On the Atmos mix, there's one channel clearly in the height speakers and another one clearly in the back speakers. And it gives you this sensation that like the plucks are coming from the back and the notes are coming from the front. And it's really trippy. I mean, that's something that I had to listen to a couple times just to wrap my brain around that sound. It sounds like something from another galaxy to me. What a great mix. What a great album. Fantastic box set. Joe, Travers, Ahmet, Zappa Family Trust, if you're watching this, I love these. Please do more of them. My only wish in this life is to one day hear Inca Roads and Atmos. So I would love for this series to continue. I want to hear more of this. I think such love and care has been taken with the history and presentation, the mastering. Every aspect is top notch. The extras are fantastic. If I have one small gripe, and this is going to offend maybe some of the necessary people, but I think it would have been nice to include the entirety of the Crux of the Biscuit Project Object tracks. And something like the Blu-ray would have been the perfect place to put this as an extra. Make it a box set on the disc. Because Crux of the Biscuit's out of print. I tried to pick it up for research for this, and I can't find it anywhere for a reasonable price. I would like to have seen that entire set included, but that's a small gripe. Otherwise, I'm 100% thrilled with this. I'm glad that Frank's quad mix is back in print. It's much more authentic. It sounds much more glued together than the Atmos mix, but it's not as discreet. But still, I'm happy to have both. I think I'll probably play the Atmos over it, but having both is a huge plus. And I just want to commend everyone involved with this box set for creating something that I think is worth the money. I mean, I know it's expensive, but I don't feel like I wasted my money. I feel like I enjoyed every single disc of this. So, all right, that concludes my review. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to leave me a comment. How do you feel about it? Do you want more of this sort of thing from the Zappa Family Trust? Are you as excited as I am? Let me know. I would love to hear your response. Also, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. If you are looking to support the channel, I did leave a Amazon wish list in the description, which features the Hot Rats box set. That's my holy grail at the moment, and I really want that thing. I had a used copy slip through my fingers last night, and it was very frustrating. So that's kind of like the last puzzle, the last piece of my Frank Zappa box set puzzle, at least for now. So yeah, with that in mind, I want to thank you all for joining me today. I'm sorry if it ran a little bit longer, but there was lots to talk about here. Once again, my name's Beabout, and you'll hear from me real soon. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching.